I am in Kowloon Park in Hong Kong, which of course used to be controlled by the British, but prior to the Opium Wars, the British had little to no influence in China. In fact, they could only trade through Guangzhou or Portuguese Macau, and in Guangzhou between the mid-18th to mid-19th century, that trade was sort of controlled by a group of Chinese merchants known as the Hong as part of the Canton system. Well, in fact, the Kangxi Emperor opened up a few other cities to European merchants to, in his words, show off the populous and affluent nature of his rule. But a disagreement with the Pope forced him to close off these cities and become more isolated, but I'll talk about that in another video. Anyway, over time, 13 factories were built in Guangzhou, then known as Canton, and generally speaking, there was one for each of the major foreign powers, and this was the only place that foreigners could reside within Guangzhou. Plus, trade was heavily restricted. For instance, the Ko-Hong, the Chinese merchants, essentially acted as guarantors to the foreign merchants. And the only reason this was because in the mid-18th century, a British merchant named Flint broke the laws by sailing north to make a complaint direct to the emperor. Now, some Chinese made a great deal of money from this system. For instance, there was a man named Hokwa who, in his day, was one of the richest men in the world. But anyway, the British tried to get more trading opportunities in China over the following decades. For instance, in the late 18th century, King George sent Earl Macartney to meet with the Chinese emperor. Now, Macartney was an imperialist. He was one of the first people to say that the sun never set on the British Empire after their conquest in the 7 Years' War. So, it's no surprise that he sent back reports saying that the breakup of China was inevitable and the British with their genius and spirit would be the greatest benefactors from this breakup. Now, because he did see the British as being superior, he refused to kowtow to the Chinese emperor unless a Chinese person of similar rank kowtowed to a portrait of King George. Of course, this was refused, but the emperor did send a letter back to King George, and I think whether or not he kowtowed made very little difference. To read you a bit of it, hitherto all European nations, including your own country's barbarian merchants, have carried on their trade at Canton. Such has been the procedure for many years, although our celestial empire possesses all things in prolific abundance and lacks no product within its own borders. There was therefore no need to import the manufactures of outside barbarians. He goes on to say that the trading system in Canton was more of a favour to Europeans and that the English were no different to any other European nations, but at the end warns the English not to land any other ports again except Guangzhou. Fast forward to the Opium Wars, Britain wins, gets Hong Kong. In fact, one of Earl Macartney's descendants fought in that war. But anyway, now Britain doesn't want to see China divided for a couple of reasons. First of all, with China united, they had access to all the country's trade, plus they ran the risk of a costly scramble for China ensuing. Well, more specifically, a lot of private businesses that were set up here in Hong Kong didn't want to see the Chinese empire fall apart. So, in 1874, they loaned China money, and this was the first ever time in Chinese history that they took out a foreign loan. In fact, the new bank here in Hong Kong at the time, HSBC, loaned some of the most money to the Chinese government. Between 1874-ish and 1895-ish, they loaned around £12 million to the Chinese government, and this paid for the modernisation of their army, the war with Japan, the crushing of rebellions, and also the subsequent war reparations to Japan, and the building of railroads and the like. Of course, it wasn't just HSBC who did this, there was businesses scattered across China doing the same thing, for instance the Sassoon family in Shanghai. But these loans probably kept the Qing dynasty around for longer than they should have been.